Welcome back to the case study of Vanitas, anime review episode number 11. This I'm reviewing the 11th episode of the series, which is called Serment, Promise. Now, this episode adapts most of chapter 19, except for about a few pages, I'd say about 6. It does adapt the entirety of chapter 20 and most of chapter 20.5. Well, all but the last few pages of the thing. Yeah, online it says basically it's like 42 pages. I counted it was more like about 40, I'd say. I'd say about 41. And it's kind of the same thing with chapter 19. Online, the information about this chapter says it's like 60. It's like. Oh, now it's. Okay. I guess I was wrong there. Yeah, turns out I was actually correct about that. Yeah, basically all about, I'd say, a few pages. But basically, the way they adapt this is kind of weird, to say the least. Though they did adapt pretty much for chapter number 20.5. This one adapted all but the last, few pages of the chapter. Mm-hmm. Yes. The way the order was kind of interesting. Like, they started with the last few pages of chapter 19, where you see Jeannie just standing by a pole, like one of these, special, advertising pillars. And she's there waiting for somebody. Who's she waiting for? Vanitas. The reason why she's invited him there? To go on a date. Yep, that was simply the reason for it. Now, they do a flashback. They go right to the start of the chapter, skipping over the opening page, mind you, where basically you have Vanitas getting no familia. Yes, making her first appearance in this particular anime. I think it's been a while. Not since they pretty much wrapped up the first arc of the series, which was basically back in, let's see, what episode was that? That was back in episode number, this is pretty much when they wrapped up the first arc, pretty much. That was back in episode, one that comes up here. That was back in episode 3. Yep, that was the last time she appeared. Episode 3. That is pretty much when they pretty much had her last appearance in the series. Now, I kind of thought, though, that maybe they might, pretty much in the way the Catacombs arc is pretty much over with it. Though they just give a few pages from the ending of the scene. But I think they pretty much started the Beast of Gavin arc, which is basically 24 chapters. Though, in the case of this, they're not going to finish it because, from what I've heard from online, because next week's episode, episode 12, which is called Point of Departure, is the finale for the first half of the series. Well, they say it's the finale for season 1. Well, I'm like, okay. So, that does trim down the amount of shows starting next week down from 3, after next week anyway, from 3 down to 2. And I think the following week will be down to 1. So, then pretty much after that particular scene where you have Vanitas going on, we see Noe basically on the floor. Though we do go back to it a little bit later, where we see, then we have the segment, basically we have Vanitas taking Jeannie around Paris because she's never got a chance to look at Paris properly because she has to watch her master Lucia, a little kid. So they go to various places. I recognize maybe 2 of the places they go to. One of the places they go to is the Arch of Jerome, I think it is, and Notre Dame. Aside from those 2 places, the rest of the places that are seen in this episode, I have no idea what the heck they are because I've never been to Paris. Now, this is kind of very familiar territory for me. I had just watched an episode 2 days prior to this, actually 3 days ago, on Wednesday, when they had the newest episode of Mr. Kobayashi's Dragon Maid came out, and it was kind of the same thing too with that one. Though in the case of that one, that was more familiar landmarks for me because I've been to New York City. Paris, never been there before. Of course, they do mention in the episode about this thing called the Sun Tower And they mention the guy who actually created the Eiffel Tower, Eiffel himself. He's not seen the episode. They mention particular exposition coming up for him, and they think it might be like a Tower of Babel or something. Let's see. Let's see. The designer of it, his name is Eiffel, definitely. Well, that's what they say on the actual. Yeah. They actually mentioned in the episode, which is quite interesting. So, since the fact the Eiffel Tower is not seen the episode itself, so we assume by basically watching this particular series that it takes place prior to 1887. I would say between the years of like 1880 to about 1886. You could probably fit somewhere there because Eiffel Tower is nowhere to be seen in Paris at this point because if you see in present day, the Eiffel Tower is there right now. Yep, it may have started back in. I mentioned something called the Sun Tower, which basically was not exactly like. Yeah, they mentioned the Sun Tower. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, I think it may have made it for the series, but he thinks that Vanitas compares the Eiffel Tower to the Tower of Babel because I think it's quite big. It is. It was basically the tallest building from 1889 to 1930, like a long time. Like I would say probably the building that surpassed it. I could think it was probably the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So pretty much like after going through Paris, then of course we had now before I get back to Noe basically because they kind of basically intersplice back and forth between him and Vanitas at this point because part of it basically is I'll focus on Vanitas, and later on they kind of intersplice going back between Vanitas and Noe for pretty much the rest of the episode. So let's focus on Vanitas first. So like they're in the park, and of course we see that that of course Jeannie got advice about Vanitas from Dominique, the Noe's childhood friend, and the woman who is implied to be in love with Noe. I wouldn't be surprised if she basically ended up marrying him because she's a beautiful woman. And I'm like, Noe, you are a lucky guy. And yet, your childhood friend is so beautiful and she's in love with you and you are completely oblivious to it. So basically, they bring up the fact that something that Vanitas basically mentioned a few episodes back, that he basically, if someone falls in love with him, he will have zero interest in them. Though apparently she plays it off. And then of course where like after basically like talking for a while, and of course they go to the tallest hill in Paris. I don't know if it is. I haven't looked it up yet. So, and then of course they're there for a while, and of course she kind of confesses her true feelings. Apparently, while he's standing right behind her, and he's like so happy the fact that she feels that way about him. And then of course a kid actually trips over, he bruises his knee, and then of course our fangs come out, and of course like, oh crap, it's a vampire! And of course she ends up basically biting basically his forearm in order to stop her from harming the kid. So they go to a private location. Yes, a private location with Luca nowhere to be around. So they chat for a bit. And of course, they ask basically ask again if she's a curse bearer. And apparently she's not allowed to tell him because she's under orders, probably from Lord Revan. Yep, Lord Redvan. And then, of course, she's like still thirsty for blood after looking at his arm. Then he has bind to her neck, and basically he says that if he can't cure her, he will kill her personally. And she is perfectly accepting of that. She has no problem with the fact that Vanitas probably will kill her. And that's it for that. And meanwhile, though, we see that Lord Revan has come to Noe's room. And he is basically just asleep on the floor. It's like, oh, did you have a good dream? He's like, yeah. Now, in the manga, basically, they had this particular moment happen just after Vanitas left. And then we had the stuff with him and Genie. This basically, what the anime did is they had to have the Genie stuff, the Vanitas Genie interspliced with Noe and, of course, Lord Redvan. My only guess is the reason why, because they need to go back and forth. You don't have to focus on one thing the whole episode. And this is fine with me. I got personally no problem with it at all. Despite the fact, yes, they seem to take 2 different chapters. It's not really big of an issue. And pretty much we just have just these two chatting in the cafe, which, according to Lord Revan, apparently this cafe was built back in the late 17th century. And he basically, the reason, now they do mention the reason why they're all alone in this particular place. It's not due to social distancing. 19th century, basically the pandemic doesn't exist at that point, so don't worry about that. The reason why, he rents out the whole place. All so they can have a conversation. He's rich, so whatever. And he also mentions it's one of his favorite places in the mortal world to visit. And after chatting with Noe for a while, it mentions back he reveals he used to be a teacher. And it turns out all the students are dead. Basically, apparently, he's also very excited. Noe mentions he's basically very excited to talk to him. He also mentions that apparently Vanitas basically, well, he tried to ask him a question. He just didn't want to answer it. And then basically asked how you feel about vampires and humans. And basically he says like them both. And apparently he says, you failed the test. So basically Revan bites him to end that thing. And that's the episode. Now, one thing I should point out, though, about the vampires in the series. The way the mythology works in the series has not thoroughly been explained. For one thing, they can walk in daylight no problem. And during this episode, they apparently have a reflection. I'm like, okay. Also, here's something, though. They apparently sleep in a normal bed. Like, when you think of vampires, what's usually the one place they usually sleep? A coffin. Not in a normal bed. Excuse me. I'm not really sure exactly why the heck it's like this for. Like, I'm sure at some point they might explain in the series why the heck vampires are the walk in sunlight and actually have reflections. It's possible, but yeah. Oh yeah, by the way, you also have Dominique and Dante. He's one of Vanitas' informants, following them the whole episode. It's interesting. It's not unusual to see Dominique basically wearing pants and basically dressed like she's a freaking aviator pilot. I mean, she doesn't really stand out at all. Also, Vanitas does save Genie briefly from being run over by a car. And you're thinking, 1880s, they didn't have cars back then. In Europe, they did. Here, I don't think they did yet, per se. They probably had cars a bit later. But, yeah, they had cars back then. So if you watch, like, the very first, I think it's like the very first I think it's like the second episode, the actual cars. Now, the only thing I've seen in fiction that's set during this time period where we have basically cars is actually Shanghai Nights, and that's it. But this episode overall, really good, lots of fun, good advertisement for France, basically for Paris. And it would seem as though that the actual writer of the series must have done a lot of research on Paris for this particular chapter. And the anime probably picked up on that and just did a really good job with it. Just really good. They don't really adapt the ending of the chapter, which is quite interesting. Yes, they might probably do it next week. And, well, we'll find out exactly what happens for next episode. Because next episode will call Point of Departure, which is going to be the end of the season. Okay, so yeah, that's a particular view. I would have time to do one more, but it's getting kind of late and I got church tomorrow. So, case closed, got to wait till tomorrow then. Okay, 3 weeks in a row, basically. It's like this. Yes, it just basically, whenever I get these things, it gets so late, I just can't get to them. Okay, so yeah, so until I see you tomorrow, well, I'll talk about Case Closed, obviously, along with Eden Zero, My Hero Academia, One Piece, and Boruto. So, yeah, we're covering about 5 anime. I don't think there's any Black Clover this week, so probably about 5 or 6 videos. So, probably also expect some Super Sentai tomorrow, okay? See you next video. Bye.